Testing again. Okay, here we go. It's working. Perfect. Good. Wow, this is actually very flattering. Thank you. Especially when you're a person at a convention who's not horse famous. So anyways, thank you. Good afternoon now, I guess, to my panel, which is discovering exactly how friendship is manly. My name is Ragusa, and what you're about to see is a kind of like a paraphrase of a senior thesis I did at the University of New Haven, which was more appropriately called Exploring Gender Roles of Masculinity Through Subcultural Behaviors and Interests. I did this with my advisor, Professor Jeffrey Debus-Carl, who has a PhD in sociology, and he specializes in subcultures. Unfortunately, he couldn't be here today, and Jeffrey, if you're watching this, hi. So in any case, I guess we'll just jump right into it. So the concepts of gender have been going through a rather visible change, I feel, in the past 10 or 20 years or so. Femininity, especially, has made great strides in the past century, with them only getting, women only getting the right to vote, like about 100 years ago or so. And then from there, their gender role has often, evolved in great ways. The male gender idea and role is, I feel like, has been going through a more visible change in the past only 10 years or so, with the change in the economy, with the age of information, the internet. And at times, it seems like it's at odds with itself. Now we, obviously, as Bronies, being a male majority fan base between the ages of 18, 25 majority, kind of probably recognize this more than most people in some ways. And that's kind of where I got the idea for this. When I first discovered the show in 2011, I was in the middle of college, going to school for criminal justice, kind of like a gung-ho police academy, I guess, in a way. Not really. And so I thought I knew what masculinity was, and then I found that My Little Pony Friendship is Magic, and I was like, oh, this is cool, and I found a bunch of guys going towards it as well. And I'm like, okay, maybe I'm a little off on the whole masculinity thing. It's not what I thought it was. And so from there, I got this idea to continue observing the fandom, because it just fascinated me, everything about it, with how especially guys are just flocking to it. And I think it's awesome. And so that's kind of where I got the idea for the project. And so I guess we'll start right into it with a story. And it's a story I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, and that's our good friend Spike. I hope this works.
What do you think of that move, Rainbow Dash? Still think they're lame?
Not so much. The word fierce comes to mind. And formidable. And super duper scary.
Yeah, us dragons are definitely a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah, right, Spike. That's one of the scariest aprons I've ever seen.
What's wrong with wearing an apron? You won't be laughing when you spill blueberries all over your scales. Feathers. That's one tough stain.
One tough stain against one lame dragon.
You leave him alone, Rainbow Dash. Spike's style is unique. He doesn't have to look like other dragons.
Or act like them.
My little Spiky Wikey is perfect the way he is.
I don't act like other dragons?
Oh, not even close.
But why would you want to, Spike? Yes, you've got something those dreadfully fierce dragons can only dream of.
What's that?
Your cutest little chubby cheeks.
Cute? Dragons aren't supposed to be cute, right?
Oh, sweetie, you are turning the most delightful shade of red. It is most becoming. Oh, isn't he adorable when he waddles off in anger?
So exactly, you don't have to be an episode analyst to understand that that's clearly a metaphor. Spike is frustrated with not living up to the expectations of being a dragon, and his pony friends, who are not of his race, kind of ridicule him for it, and it's clearly a metaphor for Spike being frustrated not living up to the expectation of being what is thought to be a guy, while his entirely female friend Cast are ridiculing him in various ways or not, depending on who it was. Now, I think this episode is actually pretty brilliant. I don't know who wrote this one off the top of my head, but the way it started off after that scene and how it's just actually a Rarity and Rainbow Dash episode. When has that ever actually happened before, ever? I feel like this is the only time that those two ever have any kind of close interaction. I mean, they're going to get breakfast at the beginning of the episode. That never happens. But I think this was done intentionally, obviously, because we have Rarity pulling on his side from the stereotypical feminine aspect, and Rainbow Dash, despite being female, is the tomboy. And so she's kind of pulling on this rough and tumble masculine side. And that's why I love this picture in the top right, because it's literally split down the middle. And then, of course, in the meantime, we have Twilight, who's kind of this intermediary, who's telling him to go on his quest and discover who he really is and where he falls in this dragon expectation, otherwise masculine expectation. And as we see at the end of the episode, when he squares off with the other dragons, who, by the way, were all male, there was not a single female one there, we see that he is unwilling to live up to the expectation because he finds out that to be a dragon, he has to basically commit child murder. And obviously that's wrong for many reasons, but the point is that that's what's expected of dragons, as so we assume, because I apparently raid phoenix eggs frequently. But Spike believes it's not. It's against his values to do that, and he's willing to stand up against it in the face of complete violent adversity. And so from this, I thought that this is a great tangent to look at, because Spike's story resonates with everything I found in my study, of which we'll start from the very ground up. So people often mistake what gender is with what they might think is. Gender is not the biological differences. That's called sex. That's the X and Y chromosome which separates us. Gender is a socially constructed set of norms placed on us as a reflection of our sex. And through this, gender has the power to constrain our behaviors through the process of socialization, which is any kind of learned behavior that can be found through anything such as a home, school, media, and in some cases even later on in life through work. And so through this, for the longest time, sociologists always kind of assumed in a way that masculinity and femininity were kind of these two opposite ends of a single spectrum. They were mutually exclusive. When one thing became more masculine, it inherently was becoming less feminine, and vice versa. Interestingly enough, however, I think that was about 10 years ago, Stephen Norland wanted to study this specifically during the process of socialization when kids are growing up, because it's when they learn these roles specifically at the most dynamic time. And he actually found that there were these two gender continuums that exist at the same time. Every single person has very fluid and dynamic personality traits of masculinity and femininity, and these can change almost at any time, at any day, any situation. They're never fixed in any way. And as he pointed out, a sole reliance on this idea of the single spectrum is deconstructive in terms of going into research directions. So we get this idea that maybe gender is okay. So there's two sides. Everyone shares a little bit of everything. So maybe there's two sides of the same coin, right? They're equal and opposite. This is not so much the case, and I found a very amusing example of this online.
Yeah, I couldn't believe it when he made that play. What an idiot.
Hey, honey bunny, how was your day? I want to talk about it. I want to talk about your feelings.
Hold on, man. What?
Oh, nothing. Never mind.
Yeah, so I was basically doing a ton of push-ups, and I was like, look, bro, I can do what I want. You don't own the pavement.
Babe, did you take out the trash today?
Huh?
Oh, nothing. Never mind. I'll take care of it. Although I know I'm dark but lovely like the tents of Kadar, I just don't feel like it.
Hold on, man. Behold, you are beautiful, my love. Behold, you are beautiful.
Yeah, but I don't feel like it.
Oh, game's back on. Check you later. What's the ETA on the beef stew?
I am working as fast as I can, okay?
Babe, what's wrong?
It's just, my brother didn't call me on my birthday. He called me the day after my birthday, but every year he calls me on my birthday.
Well, just call him and tell him you're upset.
I'm not upset, I'm fine.
Well, you sound upset, so just call him. There, solved your problem.
It's not that easy. It's
Here
gonna
we
be
go.
awkward at the next family reunion.
Yes!
Dad is gonna call and it's gonna just be a mess.
What?
Nothing, never mind.
I'm really hungry. Can you just microwave it or something?
Microwave it? It's gotta be a slow simmer, okay? Crockpot's gotta heat up.
Okay, I really didn't hear anything you just said. What are we doing this weekend? You wanna do something?
Yes? I don't know. I'm confused. You decide. I guess I just want you to want to do something. Lead me.
Can't you just tell me what to do?
Tell you? Tell you? I mean, who wears the pants in this family anyways, huh?
Well, from this angle, it sure isn't you.
Why does everything always have to be a joke to you?
Come on. on, that's funny. Come on.
It's not funny.
It's
not
a little funny.
It is funny.
Okay.
It is funny.
Come
Just because I'm
on.
smiling doesn't mean I'm not upset, though.
No, come on. Dude.
So, as you can kind of see clearly, that through a satirical play on reversing the roles of each, masculine and feminine role in a heterosexual environment, that the two roles aren't necessarily really equal. Despite the guy who took on the feminine role in this case, he should be the one that's directing the conversation since he was talking the most and talking about the most topic points, whereas the female taking the masculine role was kind of just watching the game and completely ignoring him, more or less. But in that sense, you can kind of see that masculinity had this kind of like ironic sense of power over it. And from what I found in my research is that this is actually historically the way it's been. Now, as you know, cavemen at the time, physical attributes were what defined survival. And so men who had the physical prowess to hunt and defend the family or tribe had this kind of iconic sense of power because they could do this. Women at the time just couldn't. They weren't designed for it, evolutionarily wise at least. And so over time, as society evolved, there was this kind of focus on the role of masculinity as a power sign simply because it seemed to have the tools for it, even though we started to gradually leave areas where physical prowess was no longer the needs for survival. But this continued regardless. You get into monarchies and kingdoms and societies, and it goes all the way through the world wars and everything. It's always this idea of the masculine leader role. And that's because society always endorsed this dominant group practice and just in turn devalues characteristics that are not included in those masculine, dominant roles. So in this sense, feminine traits are not seen as valued, even if they could be, because this is just how things worked out, simply because they were not considered masculine. And the reason why this is because masculinity is a power struggle, specifically a maintaining of power between men and other men and women especially. And this is where we get what is the stereotypical idea of what it is, which is the hegemonic masculinity, which is a configuration of gender practices which more or less just legitimizes the continuation of power. So in this sense, every man is actually subject to prevailing expectations of this hegemonic role, whether or not they identify it in any sense. But most men are clearly complacent with this idea because it's kind of like being born into, I guess you could say, money or fame. Because anyone who is born a male, they seemingly just are, bequeathed this power of just being a guy. And so most men are obviously going to be complacent with it because, hey, look, I get free power, at least socially perceived in that sense. So in this sense, acting male is considered masculine, which therefore it translates to having power of some kind. And literally acting any other way, it's been seen, is that it's considered not masculine and is looked upon as weakness or a voluntary forfeit of power. That is clearly not true. But the thing is that, I don't know if you get the reference here, perceptions are often viewed as truths. That even though what we see on the outside might think one thing, but really doesn't actually mean that at all. A good way of looking at this was a study done in Canada in 2010, where they were studying high school kids and how they behaved in the gym class and how they actually had their opinions on media that in terms of how it portrayed masculinity. And so what they did was they showed them these kind of hyper-masculine archetypes in the media. And the boys all agreed that these things were seen as unrealistic exaggerations, signs of arrogance, and even were unattractive traits to behave in. Despite this, however, the researchers continued observing their behavior in the gym class, where they were actually supporting the exact kinds of male expectations that they just, what's the word? I can't think of it. Yeah, endorsed just before, yeah, exactly. And so researchers were like stumped. They're like, well, why would they do this? And they asked them, and one boy specifically pointed out, it's like you always want to be part of society, so you just have to go along with it. It's this kind of self-aware hypocrisy where the boys know that what they're doing is it's seemingly unattractive in some way because, yes, obviously they're playing sports, so a competitive nature is kind of paramount. But in the research specifically, they were pointing out that they were ostracizing the less physically adept to it. They weren't just playing dodgeball. I just have dodgeball here as like an example. And they were like picking on the kids that are weaker. They were maybe making the girls more easier targets because they're easier to get out in dodgeball or what have you. And so even though they make fun of the signs of arrogance and all that stuff about this hyper-masculine portrayal in the media, they would still live up to it anyways. And so this idea of the, I guess you could say, self-aware hypocrisy is actually pretty paramount, I feel, and I have a great example of this. I'm sure you're familiar with Terry Crews, the actor. If you don't recognize him from, say, The Expendables or something, he's the Old Spice guy. Not the, like, swan dive, the best night of your life Spice guy, the other guy who, like, punches buildings and they explode. And so you think, oh, this guy is, he's awesome. He's really masculine, right? Well, take a look at what he has to say on Larry King, if I can find the video.
You think that there's more effort on masculinity in the black man?
Yes, I think culturally...
It comes from slavery, probably.
I think there is... and I have to say, African Americans, there is a culture of verbal abuse, where it's like, they think nothing of just, you're too sensitive. That's a verbally abusive statement. How can you tell me I'm too sensitive? Because I can only tell you how I'm feeling. And there's a dismissal of feelings, because a lot of times you have to be hard. You wear this outer structure, because when I used to walk around in Flint, Michigan, man, you had to have a swagger, or somebody was gonna attack you, somebody was gonna come at you, somebody was gonna threaten you. And so you had to come tough, and you had to do this, and then you're exhausted. You know what I mean? But the problem is when you don't need that tough anymore, you can't get rid of it. That's the only way you know. That's the only way you know how to live.
So as you can see, even someone like Terry Crews, despite him talking about his, younger self, he acknowledges this fact that, he's a person who is in touch with himself. He doesn't mind talking about how he feels with his friends or whatever. But because of the environment he grew up in, his especially, it was something that was looked upon as a weakness, and in his case, as threatened him physically. He could have been beat up, as he says. And so he's a perfect example of this kind of, self-aware hypocrisy, that he has to live up to this facade of being a certain kind of guy, because living any other way is apparently inappropriate. And this came into terms with Michael Kimmel. He's a prominent name in men's studies. And he found that masculinity is a power struggle felt by all men, which dominates the cultural definitions of manhood. And this is the best one. Our efforts to maintain a manly front cover everything we do. Now, you don't have to look very hard for it actually is to be seen. I mean, I'm doing it right now. I'm at a My Little Pony convention, sure, but I'm wearing a Wonderbolt shirt and Rainbow Dash, and it's like, and I'm using these dark colors. I'm sure I don't speak for everyone, but I'm sure some of us out here somewhere, we're taking the My Little Pony idea, at least Friendship's Magic idea, and we're like tweaking it maybe just a little bit. Even if we're not even doing it directly, we're thinking about it passively, of it just making it a little bit more masculine or something, just a little bit. Maybe a T-shirt, maybe you follow certain fan fiction, maybe you create certain fan fictions, maybe you draw a certain way. It's all these little things we do, and this covers almost everything we do in some cases. There's one study that looked at, I think it was in the 80s or so, they looked at two groups of heterosexual relationships. They had traditional ones, which were the control group, where the man made the most of the money, the woman did not, and usually stayed home. They also looked at them versus roles that were swapped, where the female was making the most money and the guy was spending more time at home doing whatever. And they found, everything else considered equal, that the guys who had the reverse role were spending more time outside and doing the lawn work even when it wasn't needed. They were spending maybe more time, following sports or going to sports games. They hung out with their guy friends more often. They were tuning their car, doing these other things that were kind of compensating this acknowledgement that they weren't the main breadwinner, because to them that looked like they were losing a part of their masculinity and therefore their power. And so in any case, as this proves again, in a way, is that all men must adhere to this rigid gender role in order to maintain the power of being a man. And in the worst case scenarios, Michael Kimmel believes that in this sense homophobia, the fear of being perceived as gay as not a real man, keeps men exaggerating all the traditional rules of masculinity, including the sexual predation of women. And that homophobia and sexism go hand in hand. This is clearly the worst case scenarios on the far end of the spectrum, but these things happen. And unfortunately, sometimes very close to home. Consider this. In the past 6 months, we've had two incredibly violent situations where women were the targets of violent attacks. One case, I'm from Connecticut. My friend knew that girl. Not directly, but he did know her. She denied a guy a date to prom, and he attacked her, and she was killed right there. And I'm sure you maybe have heard of Elliot Rodgers and his manifesto online. These are clearly acts of violence that are predicated on these two boys, I guess you could say, insecurity in their masculinity, because they felt they'd lost their power of being a guy. I only bring this up because as a criminal justice major, combined with this idea of masculinity and power, and where everything fits. It just seems to be like a a turning point in terms of a call to action to really look into it. And so what I wanted to do was, as I've noticed with the departments I've spoken to, is that most of them are trying to look at too directly. They're looking straight to like, why are these boys being violent? I'm like, how about we look at the other way? What happens when men don't live up to these expectations and aren't concerned with it? And not because they lack the ability to live up to the hegemonic ideal or the opportunity, but because they willingly just don't want to live up to it because they don't think it's right in some way. Why would a male reject that which seemingly gives him power? And if men are exemplifying gender deviant behavior, how they otherwise relate to the idea of masculinity and this idea of the power struggle. So to do this, I originally wanted to look at, there's a population of men, single men who adopt children. These are not divorced men. These are men who literally live on their own and they actually adopt children. And I thought that'd be a great population to look at, but they are very hard to find, and especially with a research budget of $0. So in the back of my head, I was talking to my friends. I'm like, do you think I could really go get away with this for a university study? And he's like, yeah, go for it. And I was like, okay, I'm going to look into the Bronies because I think we can learn something from here. And obviously, our community is very large. We're very visible, easy to find, we're populated, and we have a perceived male gender deviant behavior, I guess you could say. And so that's where I came to us. And so what I did was I found through snowball sampling, which is where you find one person who knows another person who knows another person, and I found 9 individuals. They had to be over the age of 18, and they found them from all across the country. And they have all various kinds of backgrounds. We have people who are still in college. We have people who work in biomechanical. We had 2 fathers. One was a stay-at-home father. The other one was not. He's actually an artist in this community. I can't say who he is. All those names are fake for identity reasons. And I even had one guy who was a military brony. So I thought it was a great collection of people because they seemed to hit every single nail on the head. So what I found were, through the interviews, some lasting 10 minutes, some lasting 2 hours, most of them lasting 2 hours, was this pattern of everything everyone shared. So everyone had an original perception of deviancy to the fandom. Everyone was eventually integrated into it. Everyone felt a subcultural and outward cultural tension. They responded to it in some way, and they would downplay certain deviancies that they perceived as deviancies. They all shared a value expression, and then at the end, they had a hegemonic downplay. My mouth is incredibly dry. So, through the interviews, I found that everyone, pretty much everyone, had this initial reaction to when they first heard of the Brony fandom, which was they could look at it as strange. As you can see from these quotes here, I highlight the best parts of it. We have some people saying, what the heck is this? That sounds stupid. Why would I watch this? I was skeptical, and I thought it was funny at the time. This makes sense, obviously, because I'm sure, as most of us probably can relate to, when we first heard of it, we thought it was a little strange. And this makes sense because, again, the label that MLP's had since the 80s and everything, we didn't know at the beginning that it had this completely new reboot. So obviously, despite their concern, they were eventually integrated into the fandom in some way. And the interesting part about this was the way they were integrated was not so much just their enjoyment of the show, was that they eventually just stopped caring what other people thought. And this was something that they all were worried about at one time when they first started. They were worried what people would think of them. But once they realized that there's nothing really wrong with the show, there's really no reason why not to like it, and that it doesn't really speak to anything much greater than them, in fact, like a cartoon, that they were not going to worry about it. As you can see here, we have some quotes. I was afraid how people would react to me. It quickly faded away. One guy kept it close to his chest. Then in the end, he started wearing stuff and he didn't care. And then Michael, he said, at first, no one must know. At the very end, he says, who cares? There's no shame in it. And obviously, I'm sure we've all been here at some point, they had these experiences of tension from the outside, people who were not in the fandom. And they got the usual razzes every now and then, either directed at them or people they knew, or just they just heard it, through the grapevine. And so, we get the usual stuff that they heard, creeps, autistic, losers, pedophiles, all those things. And they were upset by this, obviously, because from their experiences, these things were clearly slanderous. They're not true. These are not portrayed in what they've experienced in the fandom. And some of these guys were not as integrated into the fandom in terms of how much they participated, but especially the guy who's the artist, he's been all around the fandom, and it really upset him the most, I think. And obviously they realized that these things were not true. And so in the end, though, they did recognize certain things in the fandom that they personally didn't agree with, which was what I called the fringe sector. I'm not going to get into detail, obviously, but these were things that they considered like sub-fandom themes, which they actively avoided by just clicking the red button in the top right corner. And what they also considered overzealous behavior. Now, these were guys who, they just stayed away from fans who took it too far out of context. So, obviously in a convention, we're all here having a great time, pretty much partying. That's different. All these guys either went to conventions or would pretty much die to go to one if they could, but they were from all over the place. But they stayed away from guys who were like, just completely out of character in terms of where they were. There's one guy who said he went to a Renaissance fair, and they were enjoying the Renaissance fair, but there was one guy in their group who was just kind of parading around a little bit too much, and making everyone kind of bummed out and annoyed. But in any sense, as Mike points out, he was the military brony. He said that it's a strange thing because 9 times out of 10 he says the unsavory part of the fandom is the loudest part and the more vocal part, and he found that to be an unfortunate reality that everyone on the outside seems to find. Now the value expression, this was the interesting thing because in my interviews I had a long interview questionnaire. I never asked anyone about love and tolerance at all, yet everyone shared the same ideas intrinsically, which was the best part because no matter whatever their background may have been, they always mentioned these things of, of acceptance and friendliness, neighborliness and respect. And as Michael pointed out, he was the most vocal about love and tolerance. He says, because he recognized it originally as an ironic joke that started on 4chan that eventually transcended into something a little bit with a bit more meaning to it. But to him, it wasn't really love and friendship. He thought it was, just love and friendship and just love for your fellow person and just common sense on how to be a good person, the golden rule. And so what was important about this is that because everyone shared it, I felt like there was a reflection of their own values and the values they wish they saw in the community at large, which was very integrated into how they portrayed gender in the end. Because in the end, when I asked them exactly about things like masculinity and femininity, they had trouble describing it because while they were verbally rejecting the hegemonic traditional idea, they found that there was a difficulty in describing the two differences in masculine and feminine because they found that both genders seem to have, very valuable traits that are basically interchangeable with them. As Fred pointed out here, he says, he knows that there's this idea that in order to be a man, you have to be winning the bread for everyone, protecting everyone. He believed that was everyone's job, not just the men. And as John pointed out, it was just an idea of being comfortable in yourself, your ideas, and being who you are. And this pattern, again, continued through all the subjects I went through. And so what I found was that they were aware of the research that I looked at just by, living it. And so, as Chris points out, he thinks a lot of it has to do with exactly what Michael Kimmel said, and it's this idea of homophobia, and that, if you don't live up to a certain kind of expectation, that people will think something broken with you, or wrong, or weird, or off. And so they recognized this concept of what is expected of masculinity is way too narrow. And what they would do was that they would redefine manhood into be something that was more easily integrated into their own personal lifestyles, whatever that may be. And despite this is why I say they never actually left masculinity at all, because in their interviews they always mentioned how, like, I could even tell in their tones, they were competitive, they were assertive, they were authoritative, and they were independent. And these are usually terms that are associated with masculine adjectives. They're clearly, obviously, women have these roles, values too, and obviously, but the point I'm saying is that most people usually associate these adjectives with masculinity. So in the end, it all came full circle because I found one last piece of evidence that actually lives right up to Dragon Quest, and it almost lives that Spike's story because it was called gender role journey theory. Might as well be called gender role quest theory. Because what they found was that there has been psychological distress being linked to men either not meeting the societal expectations of masculinity or from a dysfunctional adherence to rigid gender norms. And so to cope, some men have learned to be flexible in their identity and have thus redefined gender. Not all men do this, or all women in the same case, because this theory works for both. And so all they were saying was that some people in both genders will go through this process, this journey idea of defining the gender for themselves. And so in this very simple sense, as Spike pointed out to us, is that masculinity is just being your own man and redefining it for yourself. Because again, in the end, in the face of violent adversity, he stood up against the dragons and what was expected of them, again, child murder. And in the end, yes, he ran off with, Twilight, Rainbow Dash, and Rarity, and Teleport. And some might look at that. I'm surprised they wrote that in there because it's very interesting, and I feel conducive to what they were teaching is that, yes, they ran away, but because violence wasn't the answer in a sense. And in the end, they came out on top because the three dragons got their heads stuck in a tree again. But regardless, is that I feel like this episode, whoever wrote it, I want to shake their hand because they really hit the nail on the head, and they had a great way of portraying this metaphor, I feel. But in any case, so we can now see that masculinity, in a way, is this, it's redefinition, it's personal definition, it's a freedom of expression like most things. When we think of freedom in this sense, you know, the idea of just freedom broadly, we think of it as, you know, more broader things, but I feel like the ideas of gender are also very important to this idea of freedom of expression. And I've tried to find, this is my best way of integrating this clip, because I think this clip is beautiful, even though it's 50 years old almost, and I feel like they're timeless words. So I'll move right into the clip, because Jack Nicholson's words are timeless.
You know, this used to be a hell of a good country. I can't understand what's going wrong with it.
Man, everybody got chicken, that's what happened. Hey, we can't even get into, like, a second-rate hotel. I mean, a second-rate motel, you dig? They think we're gonna cut their throat or something, man. Like, they're scared, man.
Oh, they're not scared of you. They're scared of what you represent to them.
Hey, man. All we represent to them, man, is somebody who needs a haircut.
Oh, no. What you represent to them is freedom.
What the hell's wrong with freedom, man? That's what it's all about.
Oh, yeah, that's right. That's what it's all about, all right. But talking about it and being it, that's two different things. I mean, it's real hard to be free when you are bought and sold in the marketplace. Of course, don't ever tell anybody that they're not free, because then they're going to get real busy killing and maiming to prove to you that they are. Oh, yeah, they're going to talk to you and talk to you and talk to you about individual freedom. But they see a free individual, it's going to scare them.
No, well, don't make them running scared.
No, it makes them dangerous.
Now, obviously, if you've ever seen the movie Easy Rider, that was within the context of the hippie movement in the late 60s. But those words, I feel, are clearly timeless, because there is definitely a connection between people being, you know, uncertain of things they're not familiar with. And I'm sure, obviously, there are a lot of people who are not familiar with stuff that we do, or any other fandom does, or any other kind of subculture in some way. And it's going to scare them. I don't know if, was it Grayson? I don't know if he's here or at the convention at all. But he is? Okay. Okay. But the point is that stories like his and bullying in general is, I feel like an offshoot of this. And it's because people, you know, who don't understand, they can have a lot of power themselves, because as Nicolas Cage pointed out, and you can just think of it, you know, any experience you can think of, is that they do have power in the sense that they're scared, so they can be dangerous, even though they live in a country that was founded on freedom. So and that's why I came across this cute little picture here, because masculinity, like freedom, carries a broad definition, but the perceptions will always trip us up. And as you can see here, we have on the left side, you know, people who are 100% feminine, right side. There's very little people on that side, and then few people on the right that have masculine. And in the middle is people constantly getting screwed over because of cultural assumptions about gender. So I thought that was kind of clever and worked right in. So this idea of, you know, just being who you are is important, because as the Gender Role Journey 3 points out, is that a lot of people, you know, it kind of screws with their lives in some way, because they can't live up to what is expected of them, because they're not only just going against what they believe in, but how they want to live. And look, Terry Crews, as earlier, was a great example. You know, he's not afraid to talk about this on Larry King Live. And believe it or not, the next video I have, since I actually apparently have a lot more time than I thought I did, is Forbes, which is, I'm sure you don't really have to give an introduction to Forbes, but pay attention to what this guy says on his entrepreneurship.
You're here at South by to give a talk about being a weirdo, which to me as an editor, like the word weird, I always strike it out of stories because it's so diffuse.
What does it mean?
What does it mean?
Totally.
So talk about what it means to be weird and what you're talking about.
Yeah, well, I wrote a story for another publication or site called LinkedIn, which basically looked at kind of a lot of the most successful people in my life are very weird. There's this concept, you know, that I wrote about, which is we do everything to create normal children, just fit in, do what you're told, get good grades. It's the bell curve. Then they graduate, and the first question they're asked is, why you? Why are you different? And basically the answer, I'm not. I'm normal, right? I'm a normal person. Right. And it's never been more dangerous to be normal. You have to be different. You have to stick out. You have to listen to your gut and speak your truth. Mm-hmm. And it's the only way to live, I think, a happy life, because you can only be who you are. You can't be someone else. And the more that you try to be normal, the more you try to fit in, the more miserable you are. Weird, in my mind, is being yourself, speaking your truth, being true to who you are. So I think I'm relatively weird, but I'm still, as you judge me, I would be somewhat on the normal spectrum.
Yeah, wearing V-neck sweater.
But I speak about fear, and I've had heart surgery, and I tell people to quit their jobs, and my kids think I'm weird. I've gone to 172 Fish shows, and I've lived my life based on kind of what I've wanted to do and the person I want to be. When I look at people who really have excelled in life, there is a weirdness factor. There is I didn't conform, I marched to my own beat, I have my beliefs and I will defend them. They're oftentimes disagreeable. They will tell you what they think and maybe not back down. And I think that weirdness, that fearlessness of being able to live your life is what I'm talking about. It's not saying that everyone should go out and get a kind of a crazy mask and run around the street naked. Right. It is, do you conform to what social norms say, what the information influence? Oh, those people may know more. They're older. They have more information than me, so I'm going to follow them. Do you obey authority? We're hardwired to obey authority. So I look at that science, and I look at kind of the implications of it. At the same time, we want to stick out. So we want to be the same and be in a community, and that's natural. I don't want people to live solitary existences and die early. But at the same time, we want to carry our flag forward. We want to be different.
These people are working so hard to be great, but they're not different.
Or are they? Like, I don't think you can put on a resume, you're not a sum of your experiences as an individual. You're not, oh, you went to Northwestern, you did this, you did this, you did that. That's who you are. But what you are is what people remember about you. It's like, we like people who say I made a mistake, or I am flawed, or I'm different.
Right.
It's endearing, and that's, when we're in this trust revolution where you have to be open and honest, you are who you are. When you make mistakes, you take responsibility as a business, as a person. Being weird, being different is, I think, the only way to excel.
And I'm sure you can all think of people who have lived these lifestyles and it's worked great for them, and we wouldn't be in the world we were today if it wasn't for people like Bill Gates or Steve Jobs or Mark Zuckerberg. Like, their stories do not match up to this conformist bell curve in any way. I mean, they didn't go insane with it, but they made a lot of, creative individual risks that, a lot of people didn't think would work, and it worked out for them. And it's a concept that I find be continuing everywhere, even in my own personal life and with everywhere else I see. We have people in this community who start from nothing and they get this, awesome, crazy idea, and then it turns into something glorious. I don't know if, I'm just going to speak out because I'm a fan. Black Griffin and Mando Pony. I don't know if you're here or not. But, I don't know their entire stories, but I know, for some, their stories are very similar to a lot of people, I feel like, in this fandom and elsewhere, where they take something that they love, and most people, at least, people maybe I know in my life, they might, shoot them down saying, you'll never make it. And it's like, well, guess what? They did. And the last video I have, since we do have a lot of time, is one that is absolutely amazing. It's from a TED Talk, and imagine what he's saying towards the end and how it lines up with MLP, Friendship is Magic, way too well. Like, it's eerie, I swear.
The movies are very, very focused on defeating the villain and getting your reward, and there's not a lot of room for other relationships and other journeys. It's almost as though if you're a boy, you are a dopey animal, and if you were a girl, you should bring your warrior costume. I mean, that is, there are plenty of exceptions, and I will defend the Disney princesses in front of any of you. But they do send a message to boys that the boys are not really the target audience. I mean, they are doing a phenomenal job of teaching girls how to defend against the patriarchy, but they are not necessarily showing boys how they're supposed to defend against the patriarchy. There's no models for them. And we also have some terrific women who are writing new stories for our kids. And as three-dimensional and delightful as Hermione and Katniss are, these are still war movies. And, of course, the most successful studio of all time continues to crank out classic after classic, every single one of them about the journey of a boy.
Before Brave.
Now, almost none of these movies pass the Bechdel test. Alison Bechdel is a comic book artist, and back in the mid-'80s, she recorded this conversation she'd had with a friend about assessing the movies that they saw. And it's very simple. There's just 3 questions you should ask. Is there more than one character in the movie that is female who has lines? So try to meet that bar. And do these women talk to each other at any point in the movie? And is there conversation about something other than the guy that they both like? As a parent with the privilege of raising a daughter, like all of you who are doing the same thing, we find this world and this statistic very alarming, and we want to prepare them. We have tools at our disposal like girl power, and we hope that that will help. But I gotta wonder, is girl power going to protect them if at the same time, actively or passively, we are training our sons to maintain their boy power? And I'm talking mainly to the dads here. I think we have got to show our sons a new definition of manhood. Now, the definition of manhood is already turning upside down. I mean, you've read about how the new economy is changing the roles of caregiver and wage earner. They're throwing it up in the air. So our sons are going to have to find some way of adapting to this, some new relationship with each other. And I think we really have to show them and model for them how a real man is someone who trusts his sisters and respects them and wants to be on their team and stands up against the real bad guys who are the men who want to abuse the women. When I asked my daughter who her favorite character was in Star Wars, do you know what she said? Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan Kenobi and Glinda.
Wizard of Oz.
Now, what do these two have in common? I think these are the 2 people in the movie who know more than anybody else, and they love sharing their knowledge with other people to help them reach their potential. Now, they're leaders. I like that kind of quest for my daughter, and I like that kind of quest for my son. I want more quests like that. I want fewer quests where my son is told, go out and fight it alone, and more quests where he sees that it's his job to join a team. Maybe a team led by women to help other people become better and be better people.
The feels. Sorry, that always gets me for some reason. But yeah, I thought that was great. Thank you. Thank you. So, since we actually have a decent amount of time from what I've actually prepared, if anyone has questions or comments, now I'm not an expert. This was a senior thesis that I did with my advisor, and there's a lot of theory in it. Nothing is set in stone. I'm not even a sociologist major, but I am a criminal justice major, which has a lot of sociology in it. But if there's any questions or comments, you know, I don't know which microphones we're using. Mine? Using this one? I don't care. I mean, I got another one here, so. In the meantime, also, oh no, it's not in this one. Shoot. Oh, yeah, we can do Q&A if anyone wants to. We can be Q&A, comments, whichever. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And in case anyone's wondering, because everyone asks me, Firefly Twinkle Toes, look her up on DeviantArt. She's awesome. Oh. Thank you.
So,
Firefly Twinkle Toes on DeviantArt. No. She's
So,
lives in British Columbia, but
I think a lot of this ties into the friendship is magic, that the entire show is about friendship, and that I find that like a lot of men have trouble expressing their feelings and talking with their friends. Normally, the way they spend time with their friends is let's play video games together, let's go, play sports, and they don't share, and they're not as generous and kind as like women are in their friendships. And so I think like that's what makes it so different for men, is that, they're taking on this new role where they're actually joining together as a community and, sharing with each other. And that's not how men are expected to be friends with each other.
exactly. Like the way I look at it is, I was actually in an interview for a job, and they're talking about ways to talk about these issues with high school kids. And I feel like a big part of it is that, at least from the schools I'm familiar with, is that they're very limited in what they offer guys, because they assume every guy wants to join a sport or not do anything else. And there's other clubs out there and they can offer more stuff, but there's anything that allows them to have these bigger social circles and to not be afraid of speaking their mind to people is important. Because a lot of people, especially guys, they bottle everything up. And that's why that joke is, oh, how are you today? I'm fine. Are you? Because there's maybe something's going on. You never know.
Kind of as like a counterpoint / addition to that, I think a lot of it is because as kids, when we boys are hurt, our dads look at us and go, hey, come on, don't cry. You're a big boy. Tough it out. And that's like half of our childhood is tough it out. You're a man. Be a man. Well, what is a man? As the Disney movies, all we see is handsome guys being heroic at the last minute or whatever. And a lot of fathers don't know how to be a good role model. I like to think that my dad was a good role model because he taught me how to cook and clean and, do a lot of stuff that would actually help my wife once I get married anyway. But, I think that's part of the problem. As kids, we guys are told to wear a mask, to not show our emotions. So why would we share our emotions with other guys? We're told not to show our emotions. So why would we do that? That's just countercultural.
Yeah, exactly. I think the worst thing you can ever tell a son is boys will be boys or whatever, or in the case for any boy who's ever bullied, like, oh, that's expected. He's a boy in school. That's awful, because it's actually interesting, because there's one case where me and my friend we were picked on a little bit in school, and then now we're at school and college or whatever, and it was a big movement that was going through Facebook, I think. That was regarding bullying and everything, and it was so weird because he immediately came back, and on Facebook, he just said how, who cares, don't worry about it. Like, every boy goes through it. And I'm like, what are you talking about? You had your issues just as much as mine. And I think the thing is that when we grow up and we get out of high school, we realize there's more to life than high school. It's because we have the power of hindsight. But the thing is, when you're living in high school or in elementary school or whatever, that's the only life you know. That's everything to you. You don't know what it's like to be out of there and be in college and actually do something with your life you want to do. Because, you go to high school, you have to do certain things just to get, the diploma and everything. And this goes for anything, even outside of that. But I feel like, especially with guys, like, you can't just give them a narrow definition. Same goes for women, too. It really is. Just got to be wider.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, I've been thinking about the term masculinity and about what it actually means. what I really think that masculinity is that it's basically like you like what you like, and you just like state it, and you don't care who anyone else, well, what anyone else says. And I got like this this huge rant about it on Facebook, and people just keep saying, like, they're like quoting the dictionary about it, and it's just like, it's not even about the dictionary. It's about like how we feel about a word. I mean, everyone has a different take about what different words mean to them, and that's how I feel about masculinity. But at the same time, I'm like lost in the term of femininity, if that's actually a word. I think that is a word, but I mean, I wouldn't know how to define femininity because I'm not a woman.
Right.
But I also feel that that every human being is part male and part female, like mentally, psychologically, and spiritually.
Yeah, somewhere.
Yeah, it's...
And as you saw, Stephen Norland, you can look up his stuff online, if you remember that name. He found that, everyone's got these varying degrees of, either gender ideals in them. And the thing is, again, it makes sense, that, the Bronies who I talked to, they couldn't define any difference between the two genders. They identify that they have certain, archetypes, but they didn't really see that how any one value within one is, completely separate and stuck in that role. As one of the fathers said, being a caregiver and taking care of the family, that should be both people. Why does it only have to be the woman or something, And there really shouldn't even be like, if I haven't looked at the definition in the dictionary in a while, but it should be like stereotypically XYZ. Like these certain kinds of like archetypes and what have you. It should be a lot more dynamic, if you ask me.
My husband and I actually, for about 20 years, have been giving a talk yearly to people preparing for marriage, and we give it on gender roles and ask them, give us, what's more like a man, more like a woman. After a couple of years, I had to put in an additional place, please don't give answers that are put-downs. And we get a laugh about that, but it actually changed the dynamic. We have a lot of people do that. And I do agree that we get a lot of different answers. One year we'll get an answer in one column, one year in the next. But the one thing is, the dynamic changes when there are children. All of us have been children, all of us have been vulnerable as children and needing a secure parent or parents, ideally, taking care of us. And the one thing that is biologically true is that nurturing does most often, not always, but most often, come from women. I consider myself a very mannish woman in the fact that I love intellectual stuff. I've been going to all these talks. I don't want to sit home. I don't want to sew, okay? But I was the person who brought that to my children, and we have to make room for that. That's, if I want to make one point, just remember that when we're talking about changing roles, we have to make sure that we fulfill the needs of our children. Okay.
Yeah. A good way of looking at it is I was talking to my advisor at the University of New Haven, and there's an offshoot study I wanted to kind of do with this, and was to look at the backgrounds, the family backgrounds of Bronies in kind of a demographic sense, because he and I both agree there's some kind of connection with having older sisters. I have two older sisters. By the time I was born, they were over the age of like 17 already. And so I was always in this household with mature sisters. Like they were treated as adults and everything. And so I kind of saw this, and as that man in the TED Talk mentioned, is that we have to learn to respect our sisters. And I think it's an important thing for men to learn. Because if you can learn to respect your sisters, you can see women are, much more people. And the media likes to portray them as Michael Bay. So, I mean, I definitely agree it's not intrinsically wrong to live up to a stereotypical masculine role on paper. It's just that when you reach a point where that becomes a problem, that's where it's like, okay, take a step back and just think of what you're saying or whatever. You can be a stereotypical masculine guy, manly man all you want, and you can still be these things. I mean, there's great examples of people here who do the same thing, and that's like the coolest part, you know, is finding these people that take both roles and run with it in such a prideful way. And I think that's something to do with it. I think actually being proud of what you are is a masculine trait as well. So, obviously it's feminine in the same way, but I feel like because you're taking this independence and, putting it on your chest and just running and being like, this is me, I think that's a very independent and authoritative thing that would fall within the purviews of masculinity. So.
Yes. I think it would help, since we are at BronyCon, to sort of put masculinity and femininity in the terms of the fandom. I mean, if you look at My Little Pony just as sort of, if you look at it objectively, if you look straight at it, notice what it is, you see pink, colorful horses dancing around, making friends, things like that. What people don't see is when they sit down and watch an episode is the challenges that these characters go through and how they grow from it.
Yeah.
And the thing is in American traditional society, the challenges and the growing is the masculine part of it. We need to sort of change that dynamic, and I think My Little Pony is doing a great job of it, of showing that girls can do that too.
Yeah.
They can fight tough enemies and heroes and earn a reward. They can save princesses and, all kinds of things like that. I grew up in I grew up in, a dichotomy. My father was extremely masculine, my mother extremely feminine, and my father was always, don't cry, learn to work on cars, learn to build houses, learn to be a handyman. And I didn't learn to cook and clean until, I actually went to college and had to do those things for myself.
Yeah.
So it was like, here I am stuck in the situation where I don't know how to support myself, but that's what's considered masculine. So it was kind of a weird toss-up. It kind of just throws you for a loop.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing I want to say, that my study doesn't want to put bronies on a pedestal and say they're the pinnacle example of this dynamicness between the two genders. That it was an example I looked at because they fit a certain bill so well for the study that I think we could learn something from them. So, okay.
Will you sign my poster?
Yes, Sam.
Thank you.
I'll do it later. No. I'll sign it later. We're probably getting dinner later. Who's next? Oh, thank you. Who else signed it?
Draw point.
Oh, that guy, yeah.
I'm having really cool people sign it. Awesome.
You're welcome.
Not like I know you or anything.
I know. Who's got the microphone? Hello.
Hello. I was wondering, when I first came to this, booth, I was thinking of the video "Friendship is Manly" on
You want
YouTube.
me to drink tea in my mouth with the tea bag in hot water?
Yes. No, that would be awesome, but
I know, and I did actually think of maybe a funny way of doing that and starting the entire panel by having a tea kettle, frickin' tea bag, like, but I was like, how am I gonna get a tea kettle?
Play the video.
I know, but unless someone has I can bob for apples backwards.
I've got a quick comment and a quick question.
Sure.
So the quick comment is, it would be interesting to apply your research towards something like, say, ancient Sparta. The women there were able to divorce with no problems whatsoever. They were actually given a weapon in case their husbands attacked them so that they could mar his face, so that he would walk around in public with these cuts on his face, and he would be publicly shamed as someone who tried to assault his wife. So there was a lot of really interesting stuff that would go on in Sparta, and it would be interesting to see how you could tie in your research with stuff that happened with that.
That would be interesting, because I do know for a fact that back then, the whole women divorcing without any kind of repercussions a big deal.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's interesting, though, that they actually would expect from the women to defend themselves in such a way, which is pretty big.
And then the quick question is, as someone who deals with perceptions and work, can we talk shop after this?
Oh, wow. Okay. Thank you. I think we have time for one more.
Good afternoon.
Hello.
I guess one thing I'm sort of hasn't happened yet, but I'm anticipating. I'm guessing that most of us here got to the show after high school, right?
Yes, that's the same for me.
Are you like anticipating a sort of a divide in the fandom between us older fans who discover the show after high school and the younger kids who are watching during high school and might face more of that social pressure in high school for liking the show?
I wouldn't really know. Particularly in our meetup group, we have like 2 or 3 guys who are still in high school, which is a minority for us. So I don't know. The thing is, because my study was stuck, I couldn't interview people under the age of 18 for legal reasons. I had lots of interest in it. I had a guy from the UK who wanted to talk, but he was under 18, so I couldn't talk to him. I want to make sure that whoever has this room next has time, so sure.
Actually, me and my friend here at our school, we both, I was the vice president, he was the pres of the Brony Club. And surprisingly, there was a lot more people than we would have expected in the club itself. And there wasn't nearly as many people who came to just hate on us.
That's good to hear. Yeah, I think we're at time, so. Thank you all. This is like awesome.